Good morning and welcome to the China Forum. Thank you for joining us. My name is Kelsey Stromp and I'm a program officer with the U.S.-China Policy Foundation. I will be moderating today's program. Today I'd like to welcome retired Rear Admiral Eric McVadon to the show. We invited Admiral McVadon onto the show to discuss security issues in East Asian affairs. Welcome to the show.
Good to be here.
Let's start out with U.S. Defense Secretary Robert Gates' recent visit to China. Recent reports suggest that Beijing is ready to establish a hotline with the U.S. What are your thoughts on this, and has its crisis management improved since the April Fool's Day 2001 EP-3 collision?
Well, Kelsey, that's an interesting and I think a good way to put it. I'm happy to see that we might have the military hotline. I don't know the technical status and exactly when it might be established, but I assume that will happen. But you raise a good point, and when it is established, I wonder if they'll answer the phone. But I mean that in a figurative sense. In other words, will there be someone on the other end who's comfortable with talking to a senior American official and have the information? Because China has had a problem in the past with its crisis management, learning what has really happened and being able to react. And so this is a major step, not just in hooking up a phone line, but in our determining whether there will be a readiness to have that sort of prompt discussion with us on difficult and sensitive issues. That's a step in a different direction for China.
During his trip, Secretary Gates also indicated his wish for Japan to sort of shoulder greater responsibility globally. How do you think China will react to this, and will China accept a greater role for Japan?
Well, maybe whether they accept it or not, it might happen, but you're right, that is a good way to put it. They certainly are concerned about Japan's expanded role. To put it a little crudely, Japanese military resurgence is always a concern in China. So there will be concern there. More broadly, there's concern in China that we are moving in the wrong direction with respect to Japan. Obviously, we don't agree on that, that we're growing too close to Japan and ignoring China. And China believes that things they have done, like our close cooperation on the six-party talks concerning North Korean nuclear issues and so forth, kind of warrants our paying some attention to them. So even if we're married to Japan, that we give them a hug every once in a while.
Now I'd like to talk about, you had mentioned earlier this year, Admiral Mike Mullen, now Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and Admiral Timothy Keating, Commander of the U.S. Pacific Command, visited China. Yes. On their visit, they sort of raised the perspective for naval and maritime cooperation between the U.S. and China. Can you explain a little bit about what happened on their trips and what you feel came out of that?
Admiral Mullen, who of course is now the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, as the Chief of Naval Operations, the head of the U.S. Navy. When Admiral Wu Xiongli, the commander of the PLA Navy, was here on an earlier trip, earlier in the year, Admiral Mullen mentioned the prospect of what is popularly called the 1,000-ship Navy. In other words, international cooperation so that people can make the seas more secure against piracy and terrorism and so forth. Raised the issue, mentioning that China would be welcome if it wished to join in that sort of concept. It was brought up again when Admiral Mullen was in Beijing. The Chinese are a little wary about it, worrying what it implies for them, what they might be getting into, and also, of course, whether Taiwan might somehow be involved, and of course that's always a concern for China. Then during Admiral Keating's visit, he mentioned that he favored exchanges and more exercises and so forth, and even something that drew a lot of attention, that if the Chinese should undertake the very difficult task of coming up with an aircraft carrier, that maybe the Americans would help out some way. But it showed a general tendency toward maritime cooperation, and I think that's an important thing. China is very much an emerging maritime power, and it seems to me that it serves both of our interests for us to cooperate on this rather than becoming competitors or even hostile toward one another in things like energy security. You know, we're both interested very much in having the secure flow of oil and natural gas to our shores. So let's cooperate on that rather than finding ourselves as being bellicose toward one another in that regard.
Okay. And you talked about the Global Maritime Partnership and the 1,000-ship Navy.
And by the way, that is the new name. You remind me of that. Global Maritime Partnership. That's the concept of bringing the navies and coast guards and so forth of various nations together to cooperate in this regard.
Okay. And you touched on this briefly, but how does Admiral Keating feel about military relations with the PLA?
Well, I had a chance to talk to him briefly in October, and he is enthusiastic about it. He says, for example, something that I spoke about at a conference I just left in Newport, that humanitarian assistance exercises are an appropriate thing for us to do as sort of a next step. So one can hope that the U.S. Navy and the PLA Navy will find themselves cooperating in that regard. And I had a recent disappointment. Of course, you remember that the U.S. Navy and other navies provided a lot of disaster relief during the tsunami, after the tsunami in 2004. Mm-hmm. And the PLA Navy was not involved in that. Well, we've now had a not so severe incident in Bangladesh. I had hoped the PLA Navy might be ready to jump in, but the Chinese Navy is a little hesitant, thinking it does not have the capability and the know-how. Well, maybe we can get past that by doing an exercise in this regard and making them feel more confident and being able to work together. So maybe the next disaster that strikes somewhere near home in East Asia, the PLA Navy might be a partner with us in that. And it serves not only the purpose of providing relief, but it also might build some more trust and confidence between our countries. And of course, we could use a good dose of that right now.
You've touched on this briefly, but generally speaking, do you think the U.S. and the PRC relationship is ready for a move to maritime cooperation? Are Beijing and Washington ready?
I would have said before Thanksgiving, I would have given a very enthusiastic and optimistic answer. I still want to be optimistic. And I've spoken at this conference in Newport to some of my Chinese colleagues and so forth. We're of course referring to the fact that there were denials of port visits by the Kitty Hawk carrier strike group, mm-hmm. and 2 minesweepers that were in jeopardy because of a storm and wanted to come and refuel in Hong Kong, and those were turned down. Probably turned down because of upset in China about the award that was given to the Dalai Lama, the Tibetan spiritual leader, and also about arms sales to Taiwan, something that always concerns Beijing. Bad timing on their part, but they were probably trying to make that point. So now one has to wonder, how much has that set back the prospects for maritime cooperation? The signals that I'm getting from China are message sent, let's move on. I am not sure that the U.S. Navy and the White House are ready after these denials to move quite so quickly. So it's now a problem that we have to find a way to get past. It is far from the first problem we've ever had in the relationship. So maybe we're getting good at getting past problems.